going to go ahead and get started so that we can respect the times that have been set. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what I am going to share with you today is my dissertation research that I completed for my doctoral program. And the research focused on using logosynthesis to resolve SUDs, or subjective units of distress, specifically associated with intimate partner violence. And what I looked at was only physical intimate partner violence. All right. So I am Dr. Natasha Jones. These are my credentials. I'm also a logosynthesis practitioner and instructor. I am a therapist in outpatient private practice in the United States. And the purpose of our study was to examine the efficacy of logosynthesis in decreasing SUDs and the occurrence of intrusive memories that were associated with specific instances of physical intimate partner violence. All right. And a little bit of background on why I looked at intimate partner violence is number one, because it's a serious public health issue here in the United States, as well as internationally. When you look in the research, there is tons and tons of research about the occurrence and about some attempts to resolve the effects of the intimate partner violence, which oftentimes show up as PTSD symptoms. Over 10 million adults experience intimate partner violence every year. 23% of women experience severe physical violence, and 20% of homicide victims are killed by an intimate partner. All right. So if you haven't picked up on it yet, the impacts are detrimental across all spheres and all aspects of our lives. The treatment options that are currently available are generally under-resourced and limited to traditional treatment models, okay? Other energy methods have been shown effective in decreasing and resolving PTSD symptoms. So with my experience in logosynthesis and seeing how logosynthesis work in learning sessions and in group practice sessions, I thought it was worth exploring. And there are also several case studies in published text, even though we did not have anything in the literature, in the academic literature. So I thought it was time to put something there. I looked at 3 hypotheses. The first one was that the participants who engaged in logosynthesis treatment would report a reduction in the occurrence of these specific intrusive memories of physical IPV, that the participants who engaged in logosynthesis treatment would report a reduction in their SUDs, again, their subjective units of distress, after treatment, as well as at 30-day follow-up. So we wanted to look at the immediate benefits as well as the long-term gains or sustained gains. And then finally, that the participants who participated in the logosynthesis treatment would report a reduction of these symptoms that was greater than the individuals in the control group. So this was a pilot study. We had 4 participants between the ages of 35 and 41. All participants were female. All participants reported having experienced physical intimate partner violence, and each one of them had a specific intrusive memory of the violence with a SUDS of 4 or higher. They were not currently in a relationship in which physical intimate partner violence occurred, and they had not experienced physical intimate partner violence for at least 6 months. We use these criteria to screen to make sure that they were not coming in, participating in the research, and then going back into an environment in which they were constantly being abused. And we looked at 3 measures. We took the demographic information. We used the PCL-5, which assessed for symptom presence as well as severity. It's 20 questions, a 5-point Likert scale, and it asks questions like, in the last 30 days, how often have you had intrusive or unwanted memories of this traumatic experience? And finally, we used the SUDS, which is a single item inquiry, to assess the distress based on what the individual is reporting and experiencing within themselves. So the treatment protocol, we had two groups. Each participant was randomly assigned either to treatment or control. We met 3 times initially. The first session was to lay the foundation for the research, to get their informed consent, just to establish rapport and to get some baseline data. The treatment group then went on to complete 2 additional sessions in which they actually engaged in the treatment, and the control group completed 2 sessions in which they engaged in like a group therapy type of environment. This is the estimated marginal means of the SUD. So as you can see, the treatment group is represented here in the green. And at the onset, when we took their initial data, their mean SUDS was a 6. So on that 0 to 10 scale, they were experiencing distress at about a 6. After the first treatment, their SUDS level dropped to a 0. When we did the 1-week follow-up, their SUDS for that specific memory remained at a 0. Okay. For the control group, at baseline, their mean SUDS was a 5.5. After the first meeting, their SUDS had reduced to a 2. And when we met again for this at 1 week later, their SUDS had returned to a 5. Okay. So a little more about the actual results. When we decided on how to assess the data, I wanted to look at it quantitatively and qualitatively, but quantitatively, because it was a pilot study, we didn't really have enough data to run any of those tests. So qualitatively, this is what we discovered. For the intervention group, participant 1 reported her primary emotion as disappointment. She felt it in her heart, all throughout the left side of her body. Her symptoms were her heart was racing, she felt tingly, she was tense, she was hot, and her SUDS rating was a 6. After completing the basic procedure, her symptoms had resolved, her heart was no longer racing, the memory was no longer in her personal space, and she no longer felt the disappointment. She reported a SUDS of 0. The participant 2, her initial emotion was discomfort. She felt out of breath, and she said she felt it in her head like a headache. Her SUDS rating was also 6. Well, after participating in the basic procedure, she said she felt a calming and cool reaction to the words of the basic procedure sentences. But when she focused on the memory, she felt uncomfortable and upset. She said she was having the same emotions, but she noticed they had shifted. She was feeling them in a different place. She said it felt more like a lump in her throat, like she wanted to cry. Then she realized it was not discomfort, it was anger. So when she assessed the SUDS specific to the discomfort, she was at a 2. So I continued working with her, and we completed 1 additional cycle of the logosynthesis basic procedure, and we focused on that anger, and her SUDS was a 6 associated with the anger. After the protocol and reassessment, her SUDS had dropped to a 0. When we followed up at 1 week, participant 1 reported her nightmares had reduced from 2 to 3 times per week to 1 in the past week. She no longer was experiencing the intrusive memories or thoughts of that incident. Her SUDS remained at a 0. She had a new issue that arose, which was that she did not speak up for herself. And so her SUDS for that was a 4. We addressed it, and it was reduced to a 0. Participant 2 reported her SUDS was also at a 0 for the initial issue. She experienced embarrassment and shame, though, new emotions that had come up for her. Her SUDS was also a 4. So we addressed that using the basic procedure. Her SUDS was at a 0. 30 days after these assessments, neither of these participants reported any distress. One of them said, "Hey, I'm ready to go to therapy now. Now I know that I can do this." And the other one said, I haven't even thought about it. I've moved on. So listening to their responses was very encouraging for what we as practitioners already know logosynthesis can offer, but what the public has yet to learn. Finally, with the control group, we also had some progress. We saw some change. Participant 3 had confusion. She felt it in her stomach and she felt like she was going to vomit. Her heart was racing. She had tightness in her chest and her stomach. Her SUDS rating initially was a 6, and after we talked a bit and just kind of validated her and affirmed her humanity, she still felt it in her chest, but she noticed that her heart wasn't racing anymore, that her heart rate was slowing down, and she reported a SUDS rating of a 3. Participant 4 experienced shock and fear, tension in her arms and in her chest. She noticed that her temperature was rising and she felt like she was in the memory reliving it. Her SUDS rating was a 5, and her symptoms after we processed it, she said it felt like conviction in her heart. She said it feels like a little flutter, and her SUDS rating had reduced to a 2. When we followed up 1 week later, participant 3 was still experiencing confusion and shock, and her SUDS was at a 5 that week. She said she still felt controlled by the perpetrator of the violence, despite them having so much physical distance between them. They lived states away at that point. And participant 4 also reported that she was still feeling shock. It was still in her heart. But she had a decrease in the re-experiencing of the event. She had a reduction in the anxiety, her hypervigilance and fear. All right. So after we talked this week, they both reported their SUDS was a 2. So 30 days at follow-up, participant 3's SUDS was back at a 6, and participant 4's SUDS was back at a 4. I ran the basic procedure with both of them, and they both reported a SUDS of 0. So after the 30-day follow-up, I sent out one final follow-up that was 46 days after the 30-day follow-up to get the SUDS information again. And when I got that information, there were 3 participants who responded. When we initially administered the PCL5, each one of these participants met the criteria for PTSD. Well, after everybody had experienced logosynthesis, the 3 people who followed up report none of them met the threshold for a PTSD diagnosis anymore when we re-administered the PCL5 at that 46 days after the 30-day follow-up. So we're about 88 days from when we started. Okay. So some of the indications, primarily more research is warranted. Again, this was a pilot study with a small population, but we do see that logosynthesis procedure does appear effective in reducing SUDS, in reducing and resolving PTS symptoms, and it shows that we are likely to see sustained gains using this model. Also, group level interventions should be considered. Traditionally, we practice logosynthesis in a one-on-one environment, but I did this in a group setting. I administered the protocol to them as group participants, and everyone was still able to experience the benefits. The provisional diagnosis of PTSD was no longer met, as I just stated. Nightmares were resolved, intrusive memories were resolved. The triggers that were there before were no longer triggering distress. And there was also an increased verbalization of self-compassion from each one of these participants. So we will do some Q&A after Malou presents if we have time. And this is my contact information if you wanted to email me to ask questions or anything like that.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Malou Salanguit, and I am a master's degree candidate in clinical psychology. I am also a logosynthesis practitioner and instructor, and also an ophthalmologist based in the Philippines. My paper entitled Efficacy of Logosynthesis in Reducing PTSD Symptoms and Distress Among Adults with Adverse Childhood Experiences. It was published by the Journal of Transpersonal Research in 2022. The study aims to show the efficacy of logosynthesis, basic procedure in reducing PTSD symptoms and distress among adults with adverse childhood experiences using a multiple baseline single subject experimental design. The four participants were screened with the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire, the Impact of Event Scale Revised, the Subjective Unity of Distress Scale, and the Validity of Negative Cognition. The baseline phase involved 3 to 6 weekly sessions in the post-intervention for 4 weeks and during the 8 weeks. Principal findings presented via visual analysis displayed a dramatic decrease in all parameters. Results suggested that logosynthesis is an effective way of reducing PTSD symptoms and distress. The study recommends that practitioners do further experimental research to establish its empirical validity. The theme of the article revolves around the use of logosynthesis as a potential tool for mitigating PTSD symptoms and distress among adults who have adverse experiences. Given the prevalence of trauma-related issues in our society, the paper aims to shed a light on alternative approach that could potentially offer relief and improve well-being for those affected. Adverse childhood experiences were shown to increase risk for psychopathology, for academic achievement, reduced social economic functioning, numerous chronic diseases, adult marital dissatisfaction, and other various physical and mental health problems in adulthood. Logosynthesis is an integrative approach to healing and development to restore the flow of life energy. It uses the power of words to shape reality and enables people to resolve disturbing memories, fearful fantasies, limiting beliefs, and numerous other physical and mental issues. Logosynthesis claims the power of the word can dissolve frozen structures and free our life energy for our life's purpose. Logosynthesis is assumed to shift or resolve the energy pattern or structure rather than the cognitive perception. Therapists and self-coaches use it to address and remove distress, fear, and trauma and alleviate grief or physical pain. So the method we used was the multiple baseline design across subjects. There were 2 phases. A phase provides no intervention and gets baseline scores for all the dependent variables to determine a baseline of behavioral patterns for each participant. Dependent variables were measured repeatedly 3 to 6 times until one of them were randomly taken to start the intervention. The B phase is the intervention phase. Then the dependent variables were measured on the same day post-intervention, then weekly 4 weeks, and on the 8th week. The repeated measures allow participants to serve as their own control and is used to control threats to internal validity. The instruments used were the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire, the Impact of Event Scale Revised, Subjective Unit of Distress, and the Validity of Negative Cognition. We also use generalized measures which assess the intervention's influence on untaught tasks, meaning we use the behavioral and cognitive changes. So this is the outline of the procedure. So we give the pre-consent form, informed consent notice, and the parameters we use were ACEs of more than 1, IESR of more than 23, SADS and VOC minus of more than 4. For the A phase, we gave the dependent variables, which are the IESR, SADS, and VOC, and asked for the negative cognition and behavior. And for the B phase, post-intervention, we asked for the SADS, VOC, and changes in cognition first day post-intervention, and also used it weekly until the 4th week, where we also asked for the changes in behavior. And all of them were asked again on the 8th week, just to see the stability of the result. So here are the results. We can see the ACE scores are high, more than 2, and they have different issues. We have neglect, sexual abuse, physical and verbal abuse. If you look at the IESR scores, we have all more than 24, all on the high side. And for the SADS and VOC, also on the high and very high levels. If we compare the baseline scores and the post-intervention scores, we can see that the baseline scores are all on the high level, while the post-intervention scores were all on the low or very low levels, and that there is a drastic change from high to low. If we look at it to determine when a transformation had occurred and how successful the intervention was, researchers relied on the information from the latency of change, level change, slope or trend, fluctuation or stability, and absence of overlap between the baseline and post-intervention data points. For visual infection analysis, the researcher examined the data by looking closely at each individual's results and the combined outcomes of the 4 individuals to decide if the effects were repeated in all the participants. The following steps were used for visual analysis. First, we have the within-phase examination, which involves the evaluation of the level, trend, and stability of the data within each phase. Between-phase examination relates to the immediacy or latency of effect, consistency of data patterns, and overlap of data between baseline and intervention phases. And then we assess the independent measures or generalized measures, which are the cognitive and behavioral changes. And then we see if the effect all were established across patients, across the subjects. So if we look at the visual or the line graph of the IESR score, we can see that in both phases, we have stable scores. We have high levels for the baseline and very low levels for the post-intervention. And we have that across participants. Okay. There was immediacy of effect, and there were no overlap of points between the data, within the baseline and the post-intervention phases. And also, this goes for the SODS scores and the VOC minus scores. And if we look at across the dependent variables and across patients, we can see that all came from high to very low data points. And it's all across subjects. And to see the generalized measures, we looked at the cognitive and behavioral changes. For the cognition, we have from I am the biggest mistake to my mother was heavy-hearted as well when she left us. For TM, it was my fault. It was regarding a sexual assault. And to I was only a child then and I cannot fully understand what was happening. I am a failure to my siblings, and my parents are very proud of what I have achieved. And I will never be complete and worthy because of the death of his father or her father. So now she claims to be, I am worthy, I am complete, but my father will always be a part of me. And then we have also the negative behavior changes to positive changes. The steep slope, drastic and immediate changes in levels, and no overlapping of data points across participants suggested a causal relationship between the intervention and the symptoms. The mechanism of logosynthesis lies in dissolving the frozen energy world, which also holds the fragmented or inappropriate memories of the event, perception, and reaction during the event. Logosynthesis does not process the belief itself, but the change in the perception of the event changes the cognition. Logosynthesis targets the root cause of the negative emotion limiting beliefs rather than simply addressing the symptoms. By changing the negative perception from the environment in the moment of distress, logosynthesis can change the individual's cognition and ultimately transform their outlook on life. So in conclusion, the study suggested that the use of the logosynthesis basic procedure decreased the IESR, SODS, and VOC minus of participants. The stability and consistency of the data in the baseline and post-intervention phases, randomization, replication, and supporting general measures contributed to enhance internal and external validity. The multiple baseline design is a cost-effective way of validating novel treatment procedures. Thank you.